Good morning, Terry. Main menu. Weather. Welcome to John Deere Farm Site. Field order. Please prioritize. Work order. Confirmed. Alert. Irrigation. Irrigation system initiated. Incoming call.
Hi, Terry. We're finishing up your planter service. It'll be ready today.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate it.
You got it.
Message from Crop Advisor. New prescription transferred. Alert. Weather. Alert. Weather. Changing seed population. Files sent. Alert. Row crop tractor 14 has stopped. Message. Dealer technician ETA 32 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, and on behalf of Department of Science, IT, Innovation and the Arts, I'd like to welcome you here to our first major innovation in Partners in Technology for some time, so Partners in Digital Productivity, where we're focusing in turn over the next 12 months on each of the 4 pillar industries in Queensland. And obviously today we're focused on one of our fundamental and long-standing pillar industries, which is the agriculture industry. I find this very timely because I've just spent the last 2 weeks out west and in the far west consulting on our digital economy strategy. This week I've just spent time in Longreach, in Windora, in Quilpie and in Charleville, and I was quite amazed by the resilience of those communities, but they have major challenges to deal with. And some of the content today, hopefully we will be able to address some of the opportunities that may lay ahead. So I'm Paul Russell, I'm the General Manager for Digital Economy in Decidia, and we're very pleased to have you here. Also very pleased to have as our partners in this event the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, or DAF, and the major rural organisations in AgForce and the Queensland Farmers Federation. We're very, very pleased to have them as our partners today. Just a few little housekeeping. I know that a number of you would have been here to the Edge complex before, but if we need to evacuate, we'll go back through those sliding doors and out into the area towards the Victoria Bridge. The format today is that after the introduction, I'll be inviting Professor Mike Keppell from the Australian Digital Futures Institute to talk to us, and I'll introduce Mike shortly. He'll deliver the keynote address this morning. And then we're going to work in teams at the tables for the best part of an hour and a half, looking at 4 or 5 major challenges that the rural industry faces and how the information and digital industries can make a contribution to those challenges. And we'll work through those as tables. I might also say that we're very pleased to have with us today, joining us live, a group in Toowoomba with my colleague Paul Stewart online, with some industry representatives in Toowoomba that will be going live, and also my colleague John Williams and Joanne Resing from DAF, who are joining us from Townsville live. And during our table discussions, as well as inviting table captains to report back some ideas at your table here in Brisbane, we'll take it in turn to hear feedback from both Toowoomba and Townsville. And I am assured that technology will work, so let's put it to the test here this morning. In terms of refreshments, we will just have continuous tea and coffee available down the back end of the room there during the table conversations. Feel free to get up and help yourself during that period. So we'll work pretty much all the way through till 1 o'clock, but we'll rotate the tables. So the way that will work is the agricultural representatives at each table will move on. Prefer if the IT reps stayed, but you know, we're not totally inflexible. You can't move if you want to move somewhere else as well. Okay, and obviously if you do the right thing and put your phones on silent throughout this presentation. The other thing that I would encourage people to do is, if you're a participant in social media channels, we have established the Go Digital Queensland hashtag for this event. So feel free to take a photo and tweet it out or Facebook it out to your wider audience during the course of today's proceedings. Okay, just a couple of contextual bits of information. Obviously, right now, as most of you would know in the room, we have a paper out, a draft digital economy strategy for Queensland, available for public consultation until midnight, Monday the 9th of December. We'll talk about that towards the end of today. But one of the rationales for putting out this paper is to try and engage with industry sectors across Queensland and rural communities across Queensland in relation to the opportunities that are presented by the digital economy and how they can actually start to embrace this. There is a real, from my travels in the last 2 weeks, there is a huge information gap out there, as to even what's available today, let alone what's coming down the highway. So the reason why we're doing this is for all of the arguments on the board. It's about increasing the productivity of Queensland industries and government, improving consumer experience, opening up the market, etc., etc. An often quoted negative comment is that these new industries and digital industries displace jobs. but a really important study that the McKinsey Global Institute released only last year, and they're doing some really good work in this digital space. They've just released one overnight about India and Africa, is that for every one traditional job displaced by the digital economy, 2.6 new jobs in the digital economy are created. And it's all detailed in that report, industry by industry. So I encourage you to have a look at that report. And of course, you are familiar, many of you in the room would be familiar with Deloitte's famous report on digital disruption, released last year, Short Fuse, Big Bang. And in particular, agriculture is nominated as an industry that isn't impacted immediately like other small business sectors in retailing and real estate are, to your left-hand corner, but it is moderately impacted. It's got a few years to get its act together, and the impact in terms of the revenue is quite significant, as you can see up the indice there, impact change on business performance. So hence the reason for focusing on agriculture today. Many of you in the room would also know that the Queensland Government has released a very forward-looking agriculture strategy for Queensland, which takes us out to the year 2040, and particularly the government's vision is to double agricultural production across Queensland and make the industry more efficient, more innovative in its processes and techniques, a more resilient industry, and ultimately a more profitable industry. And it does that by focusing on those four particular areas. And during our little table discussions this morning, we're going to unpick some of those areas in terms of how digital solutions can have an impact on those industries. I just want to show you this video.
Is mastering new digital technology. According to a new report by the National Science Agency, Australian farmers have a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of the growing global demand for food. And one of the keys to success will be the take-up of smart digital technology.
They look like normal Hereford cows ready for calving, but this herd is on the cutting edge of a new way of farming. They're on the Kirby Smart Farm, a 3,000 hectare sheep and cattle enterprise being run by the University of New England and the CSIRO.
This is a livestock tracking e-tag, which goes in the left ear of our animals. It sends out a time beep every few minutes, and we have an array of antennae around the farm which picks up the signal and effectively triangulates and locates the animals.
So what sort of information is it providing?
It's providing location only at this stage, but from that location information, not only can you tell where they are now, so you can go find them if you want to check them, there's a whole range of hidden smarts that go in behind it that'll tell us about their behaviour and their grazing.
It's all about managing grazing rotations more efficiently and therefore more profitably, and also being aware of unexpected events.
There's a whole range of opportunities around developing fingerprints of behaviour. For example, developing an alarm for when they're attacked by animals, if they happen to be stolen, if they're calving or if they're dead, obviously, but also even down to how much pasture have I got. By actually watching those dots moving around on the map, the animals tell you themselves.
The Smart Farm also has 100 soil moisture probes developed by the CSIRO, which create a living map of growing conditions.
Now, soil moisture cuts across a whole range of operations on farm. Simple things like, can I work the soil? Should I sow? Should I apply fertiliser? Should I put animals on this paddock? How much moisture have I got? How much pasture growth have I got ahead of me? So if you understand soil moisture, you can cut across a whole range of decisions.
To move them to.
The information, raw data, can be streamed off farm, can be handled by other people out there who know what they're doing, know the software, and then the farmer can literally have a video conversation with them, a consult, every week, every few days, back in the lounge room, hands-free. The consultant does the work, they just sit back and watch television and have a conversation.
These areas definitely need some fertiliser, but certainly there's large areas of the paddock that don't need any fertiliser, and you could basically cut your fertiliser bill in half by just putting it where it actually needs to go in this particular paddock.
Matthew Walsh is averaging up to 25 litres a day from each cow. but he's hoping eventually to have individual monitoring so that he knows which cows are the best producers and, importantly, how that relates to how much feed they eat.
That'd be great. At the moment we're not set up for that, but it is something that we can look into now. The technology is available.
At Garthowen, just south of the Moonbee Ranges in New South Wales, Andrew Gunn runs a Murray Grey stud with his wife Sharon. Like many farmers, they don't have mobile phone coverage and struggled for years with an unreliable, slow internet connection. Now they're connected to the NBN's interim satellite service.
Whenever I want it, it's there, it doesn't break down, and that makes me very happy.
What sorts of things is it enabling you to do?
It's enabling me to get a lot of information about our Murray Grey breed group. It allows me to get stuff from the Breed Society. It allows me to pay accounts like everybody else, do my banking, all of that sort of thing that is very regular. But in terms of running our business, it's very good.
Australian grain growers and irrigators are much further advanced in using digital technology such as Global Positioning Satellite or GPS, which can collect data on yield, inputs and paddock history. The National Farmers Federation says the key to more take-up will be education, keeping costs down and filling the big gap in the market in software and services to make the most of the information that can be gathered. At the Kirby Smart Farm, they're also using satellite mapping technology that costs as little as $200. It's already affordable. The challenge for Australian farmers now is making it pay.
Like all technology, we can face death by data for sure. It's about rendering all that data down into critical, actionable information. Now, the farmer doesn't necessarily have to be able to go on the website and trawl through masses of data. That information, for example, a livestock tracking technology, could be rendered down to a simple SMS alert. Let's say you have an animal calving. Send the farmer an SMS alert to say animal number 58 is likely to be calving based on their behaviour. Same with the pasture. If you have a satellite product monitoring your pastures, maybe get an SMS alert when your pasture biomass drops below 1,000 kilograms per hectare, which is a level at which you want to move your animals off to maintain a good bounce back when the rains come again. So you can generate very simple pieces of information, but have a lot of smarts behind it, and that's where the whole chain comes together.
The response from people on the land out west is generally a big improvement in satisfaction with access to the interim satellite, and very much looking forward to the launch of the full satellite service in 2015, but an absolute thirst for knowledge about how to use technology at their fingertips, you know. Anyhow, enough on that for the time being. What I'd like to do now is, it gives me pleasure to introduce Professor Mike Keppell to you in the room. Some of you might be familiar with Mike. Mike is the Executive Director for the Australian Digital Futures Institute at the University of Southern Queensland, and it was launched last year nationally. Mike has a long professional history in higher education in Australia, Canada and in Hong Kong, and he's Professor of Higher Education and Director of Flexible Learning Institute at the Charles Sturt University, and prior to that was Head of Learning, Teaching and Technology at the Hong Kong Institute of Education. Mike's published widely in the field of flexible learning, and with a background in educational technology, extensive community involvement and strength in design-based research. He has a range of valuable experience to share with us in the higher education field, and his research focuses on learning spaces, blending learning, learning-orientated assessment, authentic learning and transformative learning using design-based researchers' approaches. So I'd like you to welcome now Mike to deliver our major address this morning. Thanks, Mike.
I'm delighted to be here today, and I think it's a great turnout for this important topic that we're going through today. As Paul suggested there, I come from an educational technology, I come from an education background. I work with lots of people in the agricultural industry, and I'll give you the flavour, if you like, of some of the challenges, the opportunities that I think we're facing in this day and age. So as Paul was saying, I head up the Australian Digital Futures Institute, but also to the Director of the Digital Futures Collaborative Research Network, and I'll talk about that in some of our projects as we go through. So what I want to talk about today is the landscape is changing. We've got a dynamic landscape in society, and I think that's one of the big things that is changing. We need to look at this idea. It's both a challenge and an opportunity for digital citizenship, and I'll explain what I mean by that a little further along. I'll look at a few different projects that I think have a lot of relevance in terms of the mobility, facilitating mobility, the virtual extension and some work that's being done at USQ, and connected learning, and I'll go through some of these aspects. The dynamic landscape, and I think this is one of the big things that we're looking at. The world is changing very quickly in terms of the technology, the connections that we have, both in learning and teaching, but also to an industry, in agriculture as well. A lot of these are accentuated when we go to regional areas, and I'll focus on that as we go through. The big thing, one of these things here, the Horizon report, I often focus on this because I think it's a particularly good report to look at what is changing. It looks at the time to adoption. If you look at the centre column, that's for Technology Outlook for Australian Tertiary Education, 2013-2018. It's got 1 year or less, 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years. Learning analytics is a big one, so analytics in terms of tracking information. Obviously the types of courses that are being run for learning and teaching. The ones that are very relevant for the agricultural industry, mobile learning, social media, and I'll focus on that a bit today. Obviously for 2 to 3 years, and it's already here, the 3D printing. And Paul was just telling me a story about some of the regional areas that have put printers into the digital hubs and are getting men into those particular digital hubs. Also too, some of the other things for 4 to 5 years, we're looking at the Internet of Things, having monitoring so that we can actually go into any location, any space, and it will monitor how we actually do things. The wearable technology and the embedded technology, I think, is something in the future as well. So as we know, this world is changing with the technology, and we can either look at it as a challenge or an opportunity. It's probably both, realistically, but I think it is an opportunity that we can actually look at for the agricultural industry and society in general. This one here just shows a little bit about 3D printing.
3D printing is a technology that lets you take a digital file and turn it into a physical product.
Almost anything you can imagine, people are creating. I think it's going to open up whole new opportunities in areas of mass customization.
Unlike with music or movies, with a 3D printer, a lot of things that are printed aren't protected by copyright.
One of the really cool things about 3D printing is it really changes the dynamic of a consumer culture. It turns you from being a passive consumer to an active creator.
So I think with that, the big thing to look at is the idea that in the future, we're going to be able to print some of the types of things that we need. Very relevant for people in regional areas, a little bit more remotely located. So I think it's particularly fascinating how we can replace different parts, etc. The other thing we're facing, obviously, is the internet. A great tool for connecting, but also too, getting information off the internet is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. As we all know, there's so much information there. How do we actually filter that information to find what we need? And I'll talk more about this in a little while, about digital literacies as we go through. Big thing has changed as well about different theories of learning, that knowledge has now changed to networks and ecologies. So for me now, knowledge is in the network. It's not necessarily just in front of me, it's in my networks. Face-to-face networks and also digital networks. And I think that's important to look at. This is based on some work, George Siemens out of Athabasca University, and it's changing how we view learning and teaching, but how we access information. For this, we need improved lines of communication in networks, and that's one of the big things we need to look at. How do we do that, and how do we learn the skills to actually interact online? It's also, too, that what we're looking at, one of these new skills for the future, is about creating networks and connecting with other people, either via online or with other people, and particularly relevant for people who are not in the urban centres. Other things that are changing, I just wanted to touch on some of the people who are coming through our system. The students who are in primary school, high school, university are changing as well. As we know, they have tools with them, technology with them all the time. So on the bottom left, I call that a rapport with technology. So the social media literacies, the learning and teaching literacies. They're also connected all the time, as we know. They also love to generate content. And what I mean by content is everything from a tweet through to videos through to photos. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, very popular, obviously. And it's an interesting affordance that we're looking at with technology, this generating the content. Also, too, we're mobile, much more mobile with our smartphones, our iPads, our tablets, and our laptop computers. They're also adapting space to their needs, so they don't necessarily need to be on the campus the whole time. They're moving around. And this cycle is affecting all of us as we move around the state, as Paul has just done, with visiting different centres, or myself when I actually move around different places to present and actually do some work. So we're continuously personalising our learning spaces. And I think these are some of the changes we need to infuse into what we're looking at in all of our industries, particularly the agricultural industry. So what do we now mean by digital citizenship? This is both a challenge and an affordance, and we need to look at that. It's an opportunity to actually develop our skills so that we actually can interact no matter where we are. Now, what do I mean by digital citizenship? Digital identity is a major part of this. So it's safe and engaged digital citizenship. It's appropriate and responsible use. Also digital wellness. The number of people who are using laptops, smartphones and iPads will make sure that we'll keep physiotherapists in business for a long time to go. So we have to be careful how we look after ourselves in this space. Other things we look at is how do we portray and represent ourselves online, not only from a social side, but now we're looking at from the business side. Our networks and our identity online is becoming as important as our face-to-face identity. And particularly for people who are remote, this is even more important. How do you portray yourself? How do you get across your personality, the essence of who you are? So we need these rich ways of communication. We need types of digital etiquette. For instance, none of us send an SMS to someone before we phone them. But generally on Skype, I always write in to say, John, have you got 5 minutes? Before I actually call them on audio or video. So it's a different etiquette that we need to learn for all these types of tools. And obviously the ethics of relating online is even more important as we go through. These are some of the digital identity spaces that I wanted to look at just briefly here. Most of you know these, the Flickr, the Twitter, the LinkedIn, the YouTube, Blogger, Academic EDU, Facebook, SlideShare, Scoopit. There's a lot of tools out there, so how do we filter them and find the ones we want to gravitate to or are useful to us? Out of interest, how many people have a Facebook account? If you could just put your hand up. And generally, 90% of the audience. Usually it's for connecting with family. Usually it's called, the metaphor I use for it's like the barbecue. You invite people around, have a barbecue, have a chat, and then you go away. So using metaphors is very important to actually communicate what some of these devices do. How many people have uploaded a video to YouTube? If you could put your hand up. Okay, great. So quite a savvy group. There would have been about 20-30% of the audience, which is interesting. So you've created some digital content and you've uploaded it to YouTube. A lot of us are still consumers there, but it is the age of generating content, and I think this is really interesting. How many people have a LinkedIn account? Could you put your hand up? Again, I would have expected 100%. It's the boardroom. So the metaphor I use for LinkedIn is the boardroom. We actually connect, we look at who we can actually connect with, etc. And a very useful device for different industries. And I think some of these tools that are ready-made are the ones we've got to utilise when we're in different communities. But it's just not enough to actually be in these spaces. We need to know how to use these spaces. And that's particularly important. These ones here, it's the Facebook, Twitter, Scoopit. How many people use Scoopit off chance, if you could put your hand up? It's a digital curation tool. And what it's used for, I curate on a topic called flexible learning and teaching, and that's in the bottom left there. What you do is you just earmark websites and other things that you want to put aside, but you can actually have an audience for it as well. The effect of that is particularly pronounced if we look at different industries in agriculture, having different Scoopit areas and then connecting with each other to provide information with each other. So these tools are ready-made, they don't cost us generally, and they're the tools we need to encourage and have the literacies to go through. I have a blog as well that I use a little bit, but probably some of the other ones I use for my own digital identity. I like portrait photography, so I have a site for that. So again, our identity is very important, how we portray ourselves as we go through. This one's LinkedIn and SlideShare, and if you are interested in this presentation, I always upload them to SlideShare. So if you do a search on my name in SlideShare, you can find this presentation, download the PDF, because I'm into open sharing of resources as well. The interesting thing about SlideShare is that because I do a lot of presentations, I upload them, but look at the traffic I'm getting here. And in my digital identity, I didn't expect that SlideShare would be this pronounced. I've had 75,000 hits there, 80,000 hits, but more important, I've had about 1,000 people download slides. So I get feedback about what's interesting and important in my own work as an academic. And so this is the way we're going to. We're getting this feedback in terms of the types of interactions we have and the digital identity that we have as well. I'm not sure what happened in the spike there at May 13, but it's an interesting one in that some things go viral at times. And I think that's interesting. But this is getting to the point of our digital identity in our industries, in our profession, that are particularly important as we go through. Another thing we have to look at, and this is going to become more pronounced in the future, the idea of a digital footprint. And an Australian guy by the name of Betcher, 2009, put it very nicely. I can see a day in the not too distant future, if it's not already here, where your digital footprint will carry far more weight than anything you might include in a resume or CV. Now, it's scary for some, great for others, and I think these are the sorts of skills we need to teach our students in primary school, high school, etc. as well, because what you put up there now could be your future CV. And I think this is interesting in one way. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us as well as we go through. Big area that I think is a challenge and an opportunity, and this is the area that we focus on in the Australian Digital Futures Institute. I see this as the major gap that we're looking at, and after discussing with Paul, who's recently gone through Queensland, very much the case. Knowing what to do and how to do it is still the most important aspect, and how do we actually approach this? I often say to people, you've got to go back to kindergarten. You've got to play with the technology and the software every day so that you can actually develop these skills, is one aspect of doing it. But we've got to have safe areas as well. This is one student's take on digital literacies, and it's a video I use quite often. This is a 1-year-old baby, and look at the hand gestures and using the iPad. They go from the iPad, they go to the magazine, still using the same gestures. So they've actually mistaken that the actual booklet or the magazine is like the iPad, so they're scrolling as they go through. Now remember, this is a 1-year-old. They test themselves, they're scrolling on the pages. And in a moment you can see a really interesting insight from this little girl. So they're testing their finger on the magazine, it doesn't seem to work, and then they go to their leg and they test to see if it is working. So you can see there's some nuances in terms of the digital literacies that they're going to. And they're using all the actions we use on an iPad or scrolling devices. And then they're back to the other one as they go through. Now with that one, I call that a rapport with technology, because they haven't differentiated the technology device to the magazine. But isn't it scary in one way, and a great opportunity when we think of that child in 18 or 19 years being in university? What are the types of skills they're going to need to learn? They're going to have to continue to learn as they go through. Now with digital literacies, I look at this idea that it's more than the ability to read and write, now the ability to understand information however presented and be able to generate content as well. And there's a lot in that. And this is some work that's been done in JISC in the UK. Wheeler in Canada, I believe, or in the UK as well, has come up with the digital literacy strategies, talking about social networking, looking at the affordances of transliteracy, maintaining privacy, which will become more important, particularly for our kids, managing identity, creating content, organising, sharing content, repurposing and mashing up content, filtering and selecting content, and self-broadcasting. Now there's a lot there, and if you are interested, he's got a great blog about this that you can go to where he explains these further about the digital literacies. And this is the space that we actually examine. Now it's not just the Digital Futures Institute that's looking at this as well, and these are some of the ways we conceptualise digital literacies. We look at them being personalised learning, mobility, digital communities and spaces. But we also look at that in relation to identity, inclusion, economy and society. And so all of our projects are at the intersection of those. And so for research and innovation, that's what we're looking at in driving those agendas forward. Other places, but have got this agenda. In Europe, this is the 2020 initiative. Now, you might not be able to see it from the back, but it says, make digital literacy and skills a priority of the new skills for new jobs. And this was a survey undertaken right across Europe back in about 2012 or 2013. Here's some of the scary findings. 73% of the EU households had access to the internet, so 27% did not. A lack of skills is the second most important reason for not having access to the internet. So it wasn't about the connectivity, it was about the lack of skills. And it's something to keep in mind today. Connectivity is an issue for regional communities. And I know you're looking at other strategies to look at that, 3G and 4G, for instance, far beyond or far before the NBN. But also too, the lack of skills is a major aspect. If we don't know what we don't know and we don't have the skills, we don't utilise these spaces. Here's a scary statistic here as well in Europe, and this was done across all the European countries. 53% of the labour force were confident that they had sufficient digital skills to change jobs or find another job. That means that 47% didn't feel confident about changing jobs because they lacked the digital literacy skills. And this is a survey just recently undertaken. That, I'm sure, is probably the case across a lot of other countries as well. And we're actually exploring that. And I wonder what it is in Australia as well. And in regional areas, is that more pronounced? Because we don't have the connectivity that is as stable. Age, gender and education remain the key challenges. So older people, women, those with lower levels of education tend to have the lower level digital skills. So this is in the European context, but I think it would transfer very nicely to what we're talking about in Australia. That's such a big country with the connectivity and the regional areas that we're looking at. So I think that's something to take on board today as we're going through. This literacy is a contested concept and we're trying to look at it. There's no universally accepted definition, media literacy, digital literacy or even media itself. But the big thing that we'd probably all agree on is there is a digital divide if we don't have these skills and the technology. So without the skills to use the technology, an even greater divide emerges, the information literacy divide. And I think that is something we need to focus on a lot more in terms of what we're doing for the types of industries we're examining. I want to change tact here. So we've looked at trends, we've looked at digital citizenship, digital literacies. I want to look at one of our large projects that we're undertaking at University of Southern Queensland. This is the Digital Futures Collaborative Research Network. It's a project that I'm director of. It's a research capacity building project. It's a partnership with ANU and University of South Australia. It's a large-scale project that provides funding and seed funding. But more important, there are 91 researchers involved in this process in looking at digital futures across a range of projects. There are 5 projects, and I'll talk about some of those today. And it's also about leadership development as we go through. So just to give you the context of what we're looking at for this particular project. This here is the website if you're wanting to go to. You can meet the team, you can look at the projects, you can look at some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, etc. for that. And interesting information if you're wanting to look at the digital future space as we go through. So here are some of the projects that we look at. The facilitating mobility, the digital divide, virtual extension, remote laboratories, and connected learning, and some of the team members that you can actually see there. For the first one on facilitating mobility, it's developing an evaluation framework for mobile learning. And as we saw before, that is so important. The changing nature of learning in a connected age is going to rely on mobile technology, and we need to have the connectivity for it as we go through. For this, they've got some Scoopit pages and Twitter tweets as well, using Twitter there as well in terms of this particular area, and there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes there. The Virtual Extension Project looks at a web-based discussion support tool for agricultural climate information systems. So what it's trying to do is help farmers make complex decisions around climate risk management. And this is a particularly interesting project here. You can see some of the players there. Roger Stone is a world expert in climate change, so supporting the decision making that we're looking at in the sugar industry, and a wonderful collaboration through this particular scheme. Here's a short video where they're using some virtual worlds to get across this virtual extension program.
Cane farming decisions can be difficult in our highly variable climate. How will you decide on your harvesting strategies for the crushing season? Let's see how this group of likely lads discuss the season ahead.
Morning guys, nice to see the weather's cooling up a bit prior to the crushing. Should bump our CCS up a bit.
You bet, mate. Reckon it was close to frost on the flat below our place this morning. Early in the season to be that cool.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Hey, the crushing starts in a couple of weeks. Are you guys up to speed with your maintenance and ready to go?
We're close to being ready, but we need some parts for our haul out, which is being held up in transit. Until we can get them, we can't finish the job. We should be right by the time it's our turn in the group to cut, though.
We're okay. We only had some minor repairs after last season and are ready to go. We are cutting first in our group, and provided the weather holds, we'll be alright to go as soon as the mill gives us the green light.
Now you mentioned the weather, have you seen the forecast for the start of the crushing?
Yeah, I've been checking out the USQ monthly climate update. I think we're coming out of a wet period in the cycle, the La Nina I think they call it. The current outlook is that it might be a bit wetter than normal in the next couple of months.
That's great.
So I'll leave that there, because what it does, it looks at another way of actually looking at education and extension work, scenarios, second life, etc. One of the other projects looks at agricultural digital literacy and intelligent knowledge management, and also intelligent e-extension. So we're actually playing in this space with these collaborations as we go through. Here, the National Centre for Engineering in Agriculture at USQ is doing lots of work in that area, the smart technologies, the precision agriculture, etc. And if you're interested in that, John Bennett is here today. You can talk to as well about that. Okay, what I wanted to finish off with, and I'll just go back just a moment there. I think today, to be a little bit provocative, we need to actually we need to reduce the gap, if you like, between the ICT industry and the agricultural industry. We need a synergy between them in terms of how we work and how we actually work together as we go forward. And I think this video, if you haven't seen it, it's gone viral. It's had 41 million hits. And I actually think it's the best performance of this guy as an actor.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection, a pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics, and a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows? Only time. And who can say if your love grows as your heart shows? Only time.
as you can see, a great performance and a great stunt, but I think it's a metaphor for what we're trying to do today. For the industries to work together and to have that synergy and that smoothness, but also that precision of what we're doing. One thing I'd like to do, and just to finish up with, is if you're interested in further work that we're doing in rural futures, we're running a conference next year, Digital Rural Futures, where we look at regional futures, agricultural futures, and digital futures. So I'll leave it there. I think I'm out of time, and I'm sure they're wanting to keep on time, so I'll let the group decide if we go to questions there anyway. So thanks very much. Yeah.
All right, now it's time to start applying the grey matter that's in the room collectively around some of the challenges that the agricultural industry in Queensland faces in this digital age. So for the next 75 minutes or thereabouts, we're going to, in our tables, talk about 5 critical areas, challenges facing the agricultural industry. The areas are how we can address productivity and productivity improvement, how we can address broadband, access to broadband, and particularly higher speed broadband, the challenge of biosecurity and how technology can enable that, remoteness and perishability. So they're the 5 areas that we're going to look at. This will be basically an 8-minute discussion at the table. We're going to ask you to come up with 2 or 3 ideas that you think technology can enable that particular aspect of agriculture into the future. And then we're going to ask just 1 table from here and hopefully 1 table from, in turn, Toowoomba and Townsville. But if I don't get Townsville and Toowoomba connected, I'm going to turn on another table here in Brisbane to report. So, as I say, there'll be at least 5 to 10 tables here during the course of this next 75 minutes where I'll ask you to contribute your top 2 or 3 ideas into the discussion. Why are we doing this? Because we want to have the energy and enthusiasm that's in this room this morning to carry on into the new year. And particularly with our digital strategy and our agricultural strategy, we'd like to build a bit of momentum around some of these ideas and to give more flesh around the bones next year through some sort of structured working approach. So we can talk about that towards the end of the day. I should say also at 12 o'clock, after we finish this more table working exercise, I'll invite a number of people to come up here and participate in a panel discussion session for the last 45 minutes of today's event. So, for the next 8 minutes in your tables, what I would like you to do is to discuss the issue of productivity in the agricultural industry and how technologies, digital technologies, can, in your mind, help improve productivity in the industry.
Farming is one industry that always seems to face challenges, be they weather-related or, say, various regulations. It's tough to make a living off the land these days, but KETV News Watch 7's Kyle Gravlin caught up with one Iowa farmer who's harnessed the power of new technology.
With a population under 500, Emerson, Iowa isn't a high-tech hotspot. But Joe Hassel's farm is one spot in Emerson that's embracing new technology.
I didn't think I could have to get involved with technology.
Joe's breaking away from the traditional approach to farming, turning his property into a smart farm.
It's all becoming smart technology, so it's a smart farm, and it's all mobile.
Mobile technology allows Joe to remotely manage tasks like livestock feeding, fuel tank monitoring, and spraying. It makes his operation safer and more efficient, helping the always important bottom line.
We aren't overplanting, we aren't overspraying. It's good for my pocketbook, it's good for the environment.
He can also watch cameras with motion sensors, giving him extra eyes on the compound to track livestock or even alert him of an intruder. But he doesn't need to be on his property or even in the state to control the system. Years ago, Joe Hassel would have to scale these stairs behind me if he wanted to check the levels in his grain bin. But thanks to a couple of sensors and a smartphone, now he can do it at the push of a button. The technology has become more affordable as well.
You could pay as low as $10 a month, and you could pay $30, $40 a month.
But with 60% of U.S. farmers age 55 or older, is the technology too tricky for farmers to ditch the old for the new?
If I can learn it, anybody can learn it.
In Emerson, Iowa, Kyle Gravlin, KETV News Watch 7.
I wish we'd have had that technology in Sidney, Nebraska in, say, 1982.
Looks like it comes in handy.
It could have come in handy back then, definitely.
Okay, we'll do a summary at this stage. So if I can have everyone's attention. So, end of round one.
Anna Petro from Avocados Australia. Our group, primarily within the time, established that the important thing is communication between the ag industry and ICT industries. The main thing, of course, is if you've got a tool that solves a problem, you need to have an understanding of the problems and the challenges. So some kind of reach out, some sort of program that integrates and brings those two entities together would help to address productivity issues. Also, secondly, to have the ability to reinforce practice that achieves high productivity outcomes is important. So that suggests an element of education, and that's potentially the challenge for ICT, providing education across a large geographical area and having consistency of getting the message out there.
Okay, thank you for that. Certainly from what I've absorbed in the last 2 weeks, there's a healthy appetite for information and knowledge out there. But where do we start? Where do we go? And how do we access this information? And in places that I've been to, if there's one information technology provider in the town, they're very lucky. It could mainly be an electrical goods reseller that just sells packaged product. It certainly doesn't add value to it. So you also talked about, I suppose, the importance of collaboration or some sort of collaboration platform where people can go, a trusted source for information and advice about sharing of this knowledge and this information. So,
Paul Burgess from UXC Consulting. We were identifying a number of aspects of the productivity chain, and we were looking at things like remote monitoring, satellite mapping, the benefits of easy access to parts and repairs, and how to actually ascertain which part's needed, and then how to put that part in. And www.something quite often provides that opportunity. The other productivity aspect that we were looking at was the requirement for contact, easy contact with other people when you're out there in a remote location, just to get ideas. And part of that is the notion of currency of information for markets is very important to people in agriculture. So these are all pointing towards being things that save time. So anything that can save time, save people getting on a quad bike and going for a drive around Boars, for example, that's a straight productivity issue. Yep, my voice is... Oh, okay, I'll boom it out. There we go. Okay. So a key aspect there of all of those features is saving time. So time, current information, and education for continual improvement is something that's going to be coming from the digital economy and from digital assets. And all of that comes together then in cost and risk reduction, and that connectivity is provided by ICT. And what we're looking for is, where is ICT actively being involved to communicate the availability of these sorts of products for people in remote areas, for people in the agricultural sector. So they were the ideas that we were battering around.
Okay. That's very, very thorough roundup. Some very solid, meaty stuff there, so to speak.
I think there's a lot to be learnt from things like remote monitoring that mines do, and a lot to be learnt from in terms of interpreting the data. Nothing in this world compares to the real-time monitoring of stock exchanges, etc., where they take what they call data which is asset agnostic. It means it doesn't matter if it comes from the stock feed, a news feed, a weather feed, or a social feed. You're being able to merge that information and come up with the right presentation. And we discussed the fact that it's okay to capture the data, it's okay to interpret the data, but at the end of the day, it's what is meaningful when you present the data back to the farmer.
Right, yes, yes.
As per the SMS.
Contextualised for their business.
That's
yeah.
right.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
if the answer is yes, great, but
mhm.
is that enough information?
Talk about generally the issue of broadband now. So, obviously, the elephant in the room, in many respects and in many industries, but more so to the agricultural sector, is high-speed broadband, access to high-speed broadband. From what I've heard over the last couple of weeks is a level of satisfaction bubbling under the surface with the interim satellite and huge expectation about what the 2015 satellite will offer. But the big challenge is uploading information. The big challenge. So I've been lucky enough to go to 3 schools of distance education: Mount Isa, Longreach, Charleville. And families obviously get support to implement pretty much state-of-the-art satellite technologies and computers in their premises, in their homes, supported by the government, used for both education and business purposes. But the thing that's driving it at the moment is education, is the kids' education. That's what's driving the adoption of the technologies in their homes. Progressively business, but predominantly education. And the challenge being that those that are using the system for business are extremely frustrated with the very slow or non-existent upload speeds. They're talking to me 15 hours to upload a 5 megabyte file actually of photos and what have you out at Quilpie the other day. So what we're about is we know that speeds are progressively increasing through competition, technology, the Moore's Law, technology is improving, constantly every 12 to 18 months. But as far as broadband connectivity is concerned, what can we do to improve access to broadband for rural communities? And in the main, it will be, I would envisage, around satellite technologies to begin with, at least in the short term. So, I'm not sure we have Townsville connected. Is Townsville there? Paul, John, are you there? Oh, there you are. Can I get an acknowledgement from Townsville? No, I can't. No. Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back to them. Anyhow, they do exist. I just want to prove that they do exist.
Hello, Paul.
Hello, John. How are you?
Can you hear us, Paul?
We can hear you perfectly. Okay. One point that I should make to the Brisbane audience. One point that I should make to the Brisbane audience is in Townsville last Wednesday, they had a forum called Why Townsville for Innovation.
There is a delay, Paul.
Okay. So they had a very interesting forum on why Townsville as an innovation place. And there are a number of digital businesses emerging in Townsville. One where the venue of the meeting was, I was very, very impressed with this digital company that's come from nowhere over the last 2 years. But they're very passionate about getting into this race and making an impression on the Queensland marketplace. So hopefully we'll be connected to Townsville and Toowoomba in our next round of table discussions. So I suppose the key issue from our point of view in this little next session is to discuss what are the opportunities for business adoption of ICT, particularly, I suppose, with initial focus on satellite, with access to satellite services. We know that communities will receive, some communities with more than 1,000 people will receive national broadband services in the future. Some are receiving it now, but in the future. But in the main, a lot of the properties and rural businesses that we're talking about will be satellite customers of the national broadband network. So could I invite you just now for the next 8 minutes to have a bit of a discussion at the table around how you perceive access to satellite technologies might help agricultural businesses become more resilient businesses and more productive businesses. And what I'm going to ask Townsville to do now is tell us about their 2 or 3 ideas. Over to you, John.
Hi, Paul. One of the first subjects or ideas that we were talking about was that we need to be able to educate the end user about the best alternatives, the best way of using these technologies, and the behaviour around the use of those technologies to make best use of the connection.
John Bennett, National Centre for Engineering Agriculture, University of Southern Queensland. We talked about the fact that to actually have resilience in agriculture through the use of broadband, first of all you need to have broadband, and the feedback from the Digital Rural Futures Conference this year was that not how to use it, but the fact that they need it. So we offered a little solution first up, which was satellite beamed into a town directly for those closer to towns, and then Wi-Fi surrounding the town using eco-cell type technology in the same way that you have your power grid extending out. So we thought we need to address that first. Flow-on effect, really in terms of resilience, now we can actually do the same things and take advantage of the same things that people in other cities and so forth have been doing for 10 to 15 years. Now, that's a pretty important point. Digital literacy will need to be addressed there, sure, but we think that the take-up will come. Now the resilience increased, we thought the Internet of Things, John Deere have tractors which talk back to distributors saying we need parts. You call up, the guy sitting on the tractor is getting a phone call from John Deere. Oh, you need a filter. Oh yes, I do. If they'd had the shutdown, then there's a significant loss. So the Internet of Things being harnessed to increase that resilience. Big data analytics, offering semi-real-time information back to farmers. Other industries can do this, agriculture currently can't. And the last one was very quickly covered off on augmented reality. So I guess that is a way by which a farmer on farm can actually take advantage of basic analytics using something like an iPad, pointing at your pump. Oh, fantastic, the next service is due in 2 weeks and the pump's efficiency is running at X. So in terms of the resilience, we thought Internet of Things, big data analytics in semi-real time, and augmented reality.
The experience out there is there's no shortage of devices. Everyone's got devices, multiple devices. Even if they live on the properties, they've got devices. Obviously, they're very heavily dependent upon the satellite technology to be able to operate their businesses, operate, connect with communities around nearby. But often it's the ability of those technologies to talk to one another. We're talking down at this table, an issue that came up, particularly in the last 2 weeks, is this issue about safety and security of people operating on their land, on their property. And if there was an incident, I mean, it was mentioned to me in the context of the grey nomad market, but in the context of rural properties, vast expanses of land, if something happened, how do you actually communicate through those devices, through the Internet of Things, and where do people get found and located and helped, etc. I think one of the problems at the moment is if you watch digital television out there, your service is very disruptive still, and that does influence, I think, people's attitudes towards quality of service when you're talking digital technology. So I know they're working hard to try and improve the quality of digital television services, but when you're watching a program and it keeps dipping out on you all the time and you can't get the cut and thrust of it, it's very difficult to be very sympathetic towards people in rural Queensland on that basis.
Question about what happens if there's an event on a property. Yes. There's technology available now that simply wraps around an iPhone that turns into a satellite phone. Mm-hmm. It's pretty inexpensive to use, and as an emergency backup, it's a great solution. It works all across Australia.
Someone's holding up a brochure behind you, Ross.
There you go.
Okay.
So there's plenty of answers to this stuff. It's just that maybe you're not aware of some of them.
Exactly, that is the killer point, Ross, is awareness, understanding, the thirst for knowledge, yep.
The other thing we talked about is you're not going to get anywhere selling the technology if you don't sell the benefits. Farmers are a stubborn group, and if you don't believe that, try to regulate them.
Yep.
But the thing is, they're not going to pick it up because they've been doing this for 50 years. It works for them fine. Why would they change?
Yep.
Why would they invest the money in trying to get this new technology if they can do it fine without it? You need to sell the benefits not just from a business perspective, but from a family perspective.
Yes.
So that it's freeing up extra time, that it brings the kids home, they're able to interact with their friends. Yep. And if you bring that into the equation, it kind of makes it easier for them to pick it up.
Yes. So. I agree with you. I mean, that education dimension was everywhere over the bush, yeah.
So, Paul, it isn't a technology issue, it's an understanding issue and a benefits issue, I think, because we sell technology.
Yes.
We don't know how farmers live, so it really requires someone to put that story together around what are the benefits for the farmer, as Dan just said.
And the user experience there.
Yeah, hi, Doug Van Gelder from Esri Australia. I think one of the things that we looked at, which is following on that point in terms of engagement for family and things, is having access to the Internet of Things, having access to applications, social media, can actually reduce the loss of youth from farms to cities. And that's a pretty important thing, because kids growing up on farms, they know the farm. They don't need to be as heavily trained as somebody coming in from outside. So that brain drain is a real problem for the farming community. So the outcome of better broadband access and better access to these applications will be keeping people there. Another thing that we looked at that's an ICT industry that we could look at doing is around the packaging of better lower bandwidth applications. Like, yes, you can get connectivity, you can do wrappers around phones and all that sort of stuff, but you've still got to use applications. And if you've got applications and data, it's a duplex system where you want to get data down and put data up. Using satellite, you get better data down than you can put data up. So it's the architecture of the applications from an ICT industry perspective to make it more engaging for the customers and make it access for that data. Another idea that sort of two things that came together was looking at the investment profile around ICT and broadband. So at the moment it's quite expensive to get broadband out to farms and those sorts of things, but we've got the mining companies in Queensland who are pushing out microwave, they're pushing out more satellite, they're pushing out more cable to their sites. They're monitoring their wellheads and those sorts of things on farms. Is there a way that we can financially engineer it better where it's a cooperative approach? And so, the farmers, the communities, the miners, the government and the ICT vendors are actually all in it together, creating the business case and looking at the financial engineering around it.
Actually, there's some really good points in both of these tables here that we need to capture too, so we'll do that. And this gentleman, sorry.
Yeah, my name is Ross Kane. Just by way of introduction, I was born and raised on a property in the far southwest corner, and to come from where we've come from in that era, without power, without television, without radio, without telephone, to where we are today is quite outstanding. But the biggest issue the farmers, I think, are facing is the issue of trust. It's the snake oil salesmen that are selling all this connectivity gear that, just like your gear here today, doesn't work. They have spent a fortune on it, and they are sick to death of it, and they have become very untrustworthy of anybody trying to sell anything that is electronic.
Third topic of biosecurity, and I'd like you to watch this short video.
If you look at insects, diseases and weeds, they're all high on a grower's priority list when it comes to management of their crops. So GRDC obviously wants to try and develop applications which are relevant to grower needs.
Which is why the Insect app now joins the Weeds ID app in GRDC's Ute Guide series. Like the earlier app, it's a comprehensive collection of imagery and text with a very important enhancement. It's also online aware. Advances in the development of applications have seen a number of state-of-the-art features built into the Insect app, including an ability to rapidly communicate with users.
We're also looking at putting push notifications into the application. so that important information, whether that be an alert or notification in regards to insects or weeds, can be pushed out through users of the app.
Feedback from the Weeds ID app users has helped shape the Insect app's development. Not only does it have data specific to each region, it also has a geolocation feature. So wherever the user happens to be, the device will automatically bring up the appropriate region and those pests specific to that region. And identifying insect pests has been made simpler with a categorised insect list and a predictive search function, all enhanced by its ability to access higher resolution images.
This is biosecurity is such a complex topic and very specialised. Perhaps if the ag person at your table could talk about biosecurity as it impinges upon your type of industry sector, subsector of the agriculture industry, and then the table could just have a bit of a focus on that topic alone. Who can faithfully just give us a bit of a summary of what we thought were the major opportunities in relation to strawberry farming sector and biosecurity?
Well, we've had some biosecurity issues in recent times, and we like the idea. We saw the thing with the grains and the bugs. So we'd really like to see something like that rolled out to stay ahead of issues within our industry, basically.
Do you want Mike? Yep.
I think one thing as well too, if you're having issues in the industry, is there a network of critical friends that you can actually set up? So the strawberry farmers here that we looked at, there's 120 or so in Queensland. Are they linked up on something like LinkedIn where they could actually, if they do find a pest, can they actually talk to one of their critical friends across the state or within that area? So simple tools like that could be very good for communication as well.
Just a quick one, and sort of following up in terms of the information sharing, and I won't go through all of them, but one of the ideas was pre-positioning of data. At the moment, the concepts are that you need to send data out to everybody all at once, and if they aren't connected, they don't get the data. But having a look at a different way of doing it, that you send the data out to community groups, or you send it out to an association, and they become a smaller data hub for the same information of biosecurity. So if you've got an alert, send it out to Grain Growers Association, send it out to the Mango Growers Association, and then those farmers connect to the association when they can. Another one that I think following on from the point about trust that we had earlier in the last group was whatever the ICT industry tries to put out to the farmers groups and graziers, education is key, but it's got to be backed by delivery. So what you educate people on, we've got to make sure we can deliver on. And that came into the idea of provide applications and capability growth incrementally, not just in a big bang, because big bang generally will fall over. Do it in little bits and bytes and rebuild that trust.
Malcolm Letts from DAP.
Yeah, I guess our point was that there's really two levels of biosecurity. So there's your on-farm management of existing endemic pests and diseases and those sorts of things, but there's also the issue of outbreaks that are foreign, that have come in, those sorts of incursions, and communication in the latter is critically important, and we have found from experience that often communication breaks down, particularly with producers, not just with producers, but so there's that mutual obligation around biosecurity that is critically important to industry, viability, and if there's ever need for a justification around access to technology, access to communication technology for governments, it's got to be around the biosecurity issue. So it's a little bit like defence. You can actually justify it on the basis that it's protecting the whole of the nation, the whole of the economy, not just individual producers having access in Quilpie because it's better for their business.
I just want to make a small point that's come out from the strawberry thing, and that is to make sure we don't fail to recognise the cultural shift from it's the government's job to get information out there to the technology allows us to interoperate as a community, and therefore the role of government changes in subtle and interesting ways which should make for much more resilient much more adaptable networks. And anything we do in the biosecurity space that grows those networks will then have the fall over that those networks can then help to promote, I don't know, better broadband on the farms or some of the other things that we've been talking about today, because communities feed off one another.
Sort of iterative sort of process, because as you guys are talking down here about strawberry farming, you know, a lot of the I won't say incidents, but experiences will happen on the farm before authorities really know, how deep and thorough it's gone into. So that's that iterative process that we were talking about, a two-way street. Our fourth topic is the area of remoteness. And once again, I'd like to play a small little 2-minute video that'll put our mind in this space.
We recently brought you the story about drones being used by an animal rights group to spy on farmers. Well, there's a range of other uses for these unmanned aerial vehicles that farmers are more likely to welcome. While it's early days for these eyes in the sky, they're being used to assess crop health and productivity, spray hard-to-reach weeds, even round up dairy cattle.
In 2009, with funding from Meat and Livestock Australia, the team at Sydney Uni developed an unmanned fixed-wing plane and took it out to a cattle property near Julia Creek in Western Queensland. With a camera on board, the aim was to detect, map and later eradicate the woody weeds that invade these land holdings, large trees such as prickly acacia, Parkinsonia and mesquite. Nathan March, who at the time was the Weeds National Control Coordinator, said these pests cost rural industry upwards of $20 million a year. The solid-state drive was removed from the UAV at the end of the flight, and the data passed through a set of algorithms that automatically stitched the required information together.
But also these little colours that you see there, is the algorithms now detecting what's a eucalyptus tree versus what's Parkinsonia, mesquite, etc. So being able to classify the different vegetation.
Right, so each colour represents another tree, another type of tree.
That's right, and also the spot there is geo-referenced, so we know it's GPS coordinates because we've gone over and we've surveyed certain parts of the land and the UAV's flown over, so we know each and every spot where it is in GPS frame.
An unmanned helicopter would later drop granular herbicide on those geo-referenced weeds. It's a process the robotics researchers have also applied to the control of weeds along difficult-to-access waterways.
So, obviously that focused on the world of UAVs, which Queensland's got some serious capability in UAV research, development, commercialisation here with the ARCA Centre and a number of small technology companies that are playing in that space as well. But there's a range of other technologies around GIS and geospatial, etc., for such a vast state as Queensland. So what I'd like you to do now, if you could just focus a little bit on what you think might be an opportunity for technologies to help address the issue of remoteness on pastoral and farming activities, to identify particular problem areas or to address threats or opportunity. Feedback from Townsville about this question.
Some of the topics that we talked about were to reduce the effects of remoteness with technology, was to healthcare and education benefits, access to specialists, making use of social and news media, just access to that, keeping the farm manager and the family better informed, improving social connectedness, using apps like That Farms, which helps share information between farms and farmers. More efficient use of resources really equals better management and productivity of the property. One of the other things that we discussed was that better broadband services give us access to agronomist specialists that we can use on site to make better decisions a lot quicker, and that's a lot more efficient, and that we learn to make the most appropriate use of communication, so we're not necessarily uploading images on slow networks.
Hi, I'm Brad Pfeffer with the Queensland Farmers Federation. Our table talked about a few issues. We kicked off with the lack of, or the decreasing number of farm service people that are becoming available for some areas. So agronomists and those type of people aren't as easy to access these days as what they might have been 10 years ago. So using smartphones to take photo and video of pests or crop damage and those sorts of things, and still being able to access some basic services. So it's really about catching up and filling that gap. So, and then secondly to that, we also talked about agricultural groups are increasingly using online components in terms of videos to complement their workshops and things like that, to encourage farmers to get online and view videos if they can't get to a shed meeting. It's another avenue for them. And we also talked about just generally information sharing and the need to increase it and the opportunities to increase investment in the sector.
Wendy Agar from Agri-Food Skills. We actually took a slightly different slant, and we were talking about sustainable communities and overcoming remoteness and looking at the social impact of being remote and where technology can be used to break down those barriers. And so we had quite a lengthy discussion about that. We're also talking about using different models to increase the uptake of technology, because at the end of the day, all these topics we've discussed today rely on people taking up the technologies that is available already, understanding what they don't know, and then understanding how to use it effectively. And Leslie came up with a fantastic model that he'd seen in the UK where they trained champions, hundreds of them, hundreds, all over the UK, and those champions then spread the word. And we were really enthusiastic about that as a model in rural Queensland to help with the uptake and understanding of what's out there and what's in it for me. Why should I start using these new technologies?
I think one of the things coming from the spatial industry, it's out in the remote areas, it's access to their high resolution and frequent imagery and capability to actually monitor and look for change detection. So the example of the helicopter there looking for weeds, being able to pick that up quickly and attack it as quickly as possible as well. So things like an idea was a drone service. So an interesting one that Dan brought up was the mining industry does frequent drone overflights of their mines. Now, do the farmers in that region know about it? So it actually then moved into a conversation around the fact that the cross-pillar conversation should be enhanced, so that the miners and the miners associations are actually talking to the agricultural associations and the cooperatives and things, telling them that, okay, we're going to have, let's say QGC's got some drone overflights happening for the next 3 months in this area. Are any farmers wanting to leverage that? It might be a paid-for service and things, but actually offering the capability at the same time. So starting to leverage other pillars' services to enhance your capability in the farming communities. And that came back as an ICT issue, which is setting up ICT communication hubs, not just for the individuals, but for the associations, for the corporations to the individual and vice versa, and making it a very rich information sharing community so that people know what's going on and that they can actually put up their hand for a bit of help if they need it, or to actually leverage a service.
Yep. Co-opetition and cooperation. Yep, that's right.
Paula Collins, our table actually discussed a number of those things, in particular the drones, and we had talked about furnishing the service through the councils, the mines, or hubs, in a similar way that the gentleman suggested, the pillar interconnectedness of the pillars. We also found it important to have the social connectivity for friendship services, and particularly for mental health, which can be a major issue out in remote areas. as we are social creatures. But the other factor that we brought in was safety, like to monitor the movements, which has also been brought up today, earlier, using GPS with various functions on say, machinery or people or phones to enhance the safety in the event of accident or incident, and that perhaps the training in all those functions could be enhanced by using visualisation. Even though farmers may have been doing something for 50 years, they may not necessarily have been doing it in the best way. That I know from, say, training for use of in aeronautical industry or in defence is enhanced, and there's no reason why those applications couldn't be applied to agriculture.
Actually, that's those ideas, collective ideas, are very strong ideas, very good thoughts actually about the interconnectedness of the industries and how we can leverage the already, investment and costs of getting this technology into regional Queensland and just leverage the extra dimensions. Show you one final video, but we're not going to deal with the issue of perishability. I'd rather just get on with the final general Q&A session, but I'd like you to have a look at this video.
In the supply chain of perishable products, such as for strawberry, all partners involved do their utmost best to bring a high-quality product to the end users, being you and me. In spite of these efforts, a large amount of the products produced gets lost somewhere along the chain. The European Pasteur Project aims to provide technical means that can help to reduce these losses by developing a wireless sensor platform to monitor the environmental conditions throughout the supply chain of perishable goods. By identifying the weak links in the supply chain, the industry can much better focus their efforts in reducing waste. In the Pasteur Project, a European research consortium of academic and industrial partners have combined forces to develop the concept for such smart sensor tech. The technology for the wireless smart sensor tech requires small, cheap, but accurate on-chip sensors that can monitor the most important environmental conditions relevant to perishable fruits and vegetables. Temperature is a main factor affecting the rate of quality loss and thus limiting shelf life. Humidity is a second main factor, as at too low levels it can induce wilting and saleable weight loss, while at too high levels it might induce rot. Gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide play an important role in storage and packaging by inducing a state of hibernation. Finally, ethylene is an important natural gas to monitor, as it is an indicator of the ripening state of many fruit products.
And join me in a Q&A session, encouraging you guys to filter through your questions to us. And so if I could ask Lauren Hewitt from AgForce and Brad Pfeffer from Queensland Farmers Federation, Malcolm Letts from DAF, Professor Simon Kaplan from NICTA, and Mike Keppell to join us up on the stage. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is just have about a half an hour or so of Q&A from the floor and even across our speaking panel that we've assembled here. So the members of the panel are Malcolm Letts on my far left. Malcolm's the Executive Director for Regions and Industry Development in DAF. And then next to Malcolm, we've got Lauren Hewitt, who's the Policy Director for AgForce in Queensland. And then we've got Mike from the Digital Futures Institute, Professor Simon Kaplan wearing his AIIA hat here today, and also the Director of NICTA in Queensland. And immediately to my left is Brad Pfeffer from the Communications Policy Officer at Queensland Farmers Federation. Perhaps if you could just give your name and your organisation so people on the panel know who they're talking to.
Okay, my name's Noel Shannon. I'm from Progress Software. 2 questions. The first is, there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of technology around which lets people who aren't traditional software developers develop software. Do you think the farming and agriculture industry are ready for that? And the second question is, we talked about the cross-communication between the pillars, mainly mining and agriculture. Historically, there's a lot of angst between those 2 groups. Do we think that that cross-pollination is a reality going forward?
Look, there will always be people who are early adopters of new technologies, and I would say that the vast majority of businesses in Australia are not ready for build your own software at the moment, but there are obviously more early adopters in cities than there are in farms. So I think the bloke from America, I spent 10 years living in the Midwest in a place called Champaign, Illinois, and one thing I learned very quickly in such a farming-focused environment is that it's easy for big city folk to think that farmers are stupid, and this is an enormous mistake which will bite you on the head very fast. So they're just as smart as the average community. Their interests and immediate focus and priorities may be shaped a little bit differently, but I think that in time we'll see the same penetration of that kind of technology as anywhere else. This is just now a very personal political view on the question of farmers versus miners. Australia is incredibly good at balkanisation. My predecessor in NICTA used to have a talk that showed all the IT professional associations' logos, and it required 3 slides. So we're good at forming little pockets and then throwing rocks at one another. I actually think that this kind of thing might help farmers and miners to find some common ground, and for that reason it should be supported. And not everybody will come at it straight away, and people will only come at it if they see mutual benefit. I mean, for the miners, presumably the mutual benefit is it's an investment they're making in their local community and it helps to push some of the negative press away. And for the farmers, there's got to be financial benefit. The stuff that the drones send back has got to be stuff that they can use. And this leads to my last point. We are incredibly good, the technology industry is incredibly good at producing things because we know how to build the technology to do something, not necessarily things that people find very, very useful in their community. So if this is going to happen, farmers and miners sharing drones, some effort's got to be put in to make sure that the sensor arrays that are carried on the drones produce information that the farmers actually find valuable. Otherwise, it'll just turn into another failed experiment.
Perhaps if I could ask Lauren to respond to that question too, from a point of view of rural people adopting generally available technology, software applications, open source, and also the relationship between the mining and agriculture in terms of cooperating for mutual benefit in this technology space.
I guess the spectrum in terms of literacy in those applications is pretty broad, as you'd understand. So if you look at the average demographic of our farming population, they approach 60. We know that we have a pretty significant transition as an industry over the next 10 years, which will bring about quite a change, I think, in the landscape out there. And I think with that, I'm excited about the possibilities in terms of ICT and technology available on farm. So I think that's an exciting opportunity for the next decade in terms of the relationship between our industry and the other sector of the economy, being the mining and CSG one. You hear lots in the media about how awful it is and how much controversy there is. The reality is that both industries are likely to coexist, whether they want to or not, for quite a while, and I think most property owners have now come to that knowledge. Interestingly enough, over the last couple of years, there has been some interaction and some good things where the government often has intervened to assist in terms of setting up platforms. Last month, we saw the Natural Resources and Mines Minister actually make an announcement that they're putting all of the CSG data in terms of water available publicly online in terms of the globe, so that landholders could develop that trust, log on and see real-time data in terms of what was going on in each of their individual bores, trends around the area, and interrogate it in a range of ways. So I think with that brings trust and transparency, and those two things are fairly imperative, and I think that industry, both of them are there to stay, and that'll assist.
Just from the point of view of history, travelling around Australia, you go to any major rural town, those with the best buildings were those that had a history in mining. The agriculture sector's benefited from mining and vice versa over the years, and I think they'll find a way of doing it again. As Lawrence just said, there are examples. Government's got a role to play in terms of facilitating that communication. I think is critically important, but infrastructure and a whole range of other benefits. I witnessed a grazier from north of Alpha answer a question in relation to the water allocations that some of the coal mines up there are getting. His view was, in 40 years' time the coal mine will be gone, but the water will still be there for agriculture to use. So, I think those are the sorts of perspectives that we need to take.
Just one other point in terms of, I think, looking at the software side. I think sometimes we look at it from the wrong angle. I think what we've got to do is go back to what are the issues and challenges for the producers, and really focus on them and try to address those with some solutions and work in partnership. I think that's a good way forward. On our table previously, one of the strawberry farmers was talking about the idea of coming up with particular software that could help him with the dispersed workforce across his farm, and to have different points where they could input the information. That's going to save him time and energy getting around, and it gets back to those fundamental points. I think the other issue we're talking about is always got to be win-win and start with the end in sight in terms of for the mining and agriculture and the farming industry as well.
Okay, Toowoomba asked, what are you going to do for your staff to adapt to the digital age?
That's a very good question. It's fair to say that the department has a way to go in relation to this question. We are at the moment upgrading a whole range of systems within the department. For those of you, there are quite a few staff here from the department in the audience who will know that some of our software is a little outdated. That's all been upgraded this year. There's a real issue, I think, in terms of making sure that we provide staff not just with the hardware but with the software that they need. We have a lot of staff that work remotely the same way that farmers do, and providing them with the tools, iPads, other tools that they can use remotely is critically important. And I'm aware that in the biosecurity space, for example, we are supplying biosecurity officers with iPads and giving them a lot more functionality for the work that they do in the field. There's a lot more that we need to do in that space, and we are aware of that as an organisation. I think one of the ideas that came up from one of the tables was around this concept of e-extension, or there's a model that we're developing. I'll be very keen to talk to the University of Southern Queensland about this, around a community of practice, which is where we can virtually create a community, if you like, of experts who have specific knowledge in an area that the industry can then access, and that community will have some sort of bona fides, because there will be some sort of way of making sure that to enter that community have some form of accreditation, and that will then provide that connectivity that we've been talking about across a range of expert private sector, universities, in government, private consultants that are able to then provide a much more complete service to industry, and actually develop their own knowledge from that interconnectivity between each other, and build some solutions out of that. So that's an idea that we've got on the cards at the moment. We're seeking to develop that further over the next little while, and we're very happy to talk to anyone in the audience who has an interest in that space as well.
Yes, I was just going to make a comment on the interface between agriculture, between the farmers and the miners. And most of you would be aware that the mining companies allocate a certain amount of money each year towards community development in the areas in which they operate, and that could actually end up being a source of where some of the finance for these digital oversight or facilitation can occur, providing some local leaders or champions can get together and marshal the resources and the cost-benefit analysis to present that to the mining companies.
No, that's a good thought. In fact, that's an omission from the audience here today, now that I think about it, to have a couple of mining industry players present for the discussion and debate this morning. So we can learn a lot from that. Simon, you were going to...
Yeah, this is mostly in response to what Malcolm just said. The very important role of the professional associations like AgForce and QFF or NFF. If the government owns things, then everything becomes very slow. The government's very risk averse, for good reason, very, very careful about what goes out on community forums and websites and so on. If the professional associations own them and the government supports in some way, a lot of those constraints just evaporate, and that immediately allows things to happen in a far more fluid way. So I'd urge the farming associations here to talk to the relevant government departments and think of new ways to get this kind of thing out. Could the community of practice be owned by the university rather than DAF? And what benefits would flow from re-architecting the people system? Because the technology, there's not probably big technology problems in anything we're talking about today. We can make technology do just about everything these days. The problem is trying to work out what that anything should actually be.
Do you have a view about that in terms of working the increased role of the industry?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, and I guess industry is already trying to do all those things, and each individual industry has its own research and development corporation, such as MLA for the beef industry or Dairy Australia for milk and dairy products. So those organisations spend a large amount of their research money on these types of technologies, and having them owned by industry is so valuable for farmers. So we already saw on that landline clip the work that MLA is doing with drones and things like that. So yeah, industry is definitely involved in that space and will continue to be so.
Just following on a number of themes that came through our table as well, and the importance of broadband. Yesterday I was lucky enough to go to a whole-day workshop on flexible working arrangements. And I think the connectivity of national broadband or ICT connectivity for people in the farming communities and on farms can actually open up a lot more opportunity for people to use their other skills. You know, if you're an accountant and you've moved out to a farm, you could still do bookkeeping for other people online and that sort of stuff as well. And I think that that's one area that we haven't really explored in terms of, you know, the multi-skill, multi-use of the people out there. I agree with Simon. The people on the farms, they are as smart, if not smarter, than the people in the cities, but they don't have access to these capabilities to be able to leverage their skills and time to augment the money that they make on the farms. And that's something that can be encouraged through government, can be enabled through the associations. It can also be encouraged through the ICT industry of being able to broadcast out to people, hey, we need some bookkeepers in this area, or, you know, if you've got a couple of hours a day, you can actually work on books for people in the States or places like that. But I'd be interested to know from some of the panel, in terms of the federations, the educators and the department, your thoughts.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about teleworking, and one of the things we're trying to do at Digital Futures Institute is actually embrace that. One of the projects I have going is actually managed across 3 countries. It's a network of tertiary, Australasian tertiary associations, and you've got people in Mexico, New Zealand and Australia managing the project. Now, why I'm telling you about that is because by doing that, we're actually learning other skills that we can embrace to actually move forward. So I think there's definitely a space whereby it doesn't matter where you are. And some of the work that I focus on with learning spaces, seamless learning talks about the idea of this continuity of learning and moving across space and time and zones. And it doesn't really matter where you are as long as you can engage in that space. But there are certain digital literacy skills that we all need to embrace in that. And the first one is to actually really push our comfort zone. To me, learning begins on the edge of our comfort zone. And these sorts of projects I'm talking about are not always easy, but they force us to learn new skills to actually interact the way you're saying. For farmers, for other people in cities, for teleworking, all of these I think are very relevant, and these are the skills for the future.
Well, I mean, Lauren made the point about the changing age demographic within agriculture, and we are going to see a revolution, you know, over the next sort of 20 years. We've got examples. There's a little company, there's a couple on a property outside Richmond that run a company called UC, which is a remote video facility that you can set up, and so they're in the industry and they're running an ICT company as well at the same time. And I think those sorts of opportunities are really important to agriculture, so that people can diversify both their economic base, but also provides other opportunities for the young people coming through in the industry to stay in agriculture, to stay in these areas, and continue to work. So how we as a department or as a government support that, I think this sort of forum's great to start making connections. I think we can continue to work across boundaries with and have an ongoing alliance with the organisations, with the farmer organisations to support that sort of work. Yeah.
There's no doubt that most people aren't in the farming industry for the profitability at this point in time. Look, the guys that are doing well are doing very well, but we've got a large number of guys that are not doing particularly well, and the ones who are doing well are doing so because they're thinking outside the square and they're diversifying their enterprises. So I think, for example, of a grazier that I was talking to yesterday, he's a grazier, he also has quite an extensive cropping place in central Queensland. He runs 6 local bus routes. He is the CEO of the local fertiliser cooperative. He's writing some articles for Bloomberg. He's also on the council. It's a bit of a mad, frantic person, but he is one of those guys that is thinking outside the square all of the time, and he has a range of followers. So, I'll have 5 people ring me throughout the week and they'll say, I spoke to such and such next door and he was talking about this technology, or he was saying I could do something in a different way. So, they're definitely out there, but Malcolm also touched on an important point with that transition of the demographics coming through and that younger generation that is going to have to go back to the farm. It's that livability issue that is critical. We're not going to be able to pull people back to Thargomindah if we can't offer them education for their kids, the fact that they can get a doctor or some service in there when they need it, and the fact that they can connect to people, be it in their local area or somewhere else, and that's a huge one.
No, I saw a really great example in Longreach the other day. Desert Channels Queensland organisation, which was a natural resource management group and has had to reinvent itself because of changed circumstances. So with a workforce of about 22 people, I think I was told, of which 6 of them work a long way away from Longreach. The graphic designer that runs the website actually lives in New Plymouth in New Zealand now, because that's where family circumstances have taken them. The business manager is in Toowoomba. They've got staff in Melbourne, and they've also become an event management company for rural events. But they are absolutely embracing teleworking, and they're absolutely embracing cloud computing. They're an excellent case study for this digital world that we're living in.
John Hine from John Hine Associates. It seems to me that a fair bit of the stuff that we've been talking about today has been technology push. What about talking to the supermarkets, the abattoirs and the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef about what they want at the customer end of the chain, and pull and get some technology pull, some customer pull? Because, these people are going to be wanting proof of animal welfare, proof of sustainable land use management, and all that sort of stuff that will need technology to do it. And if the customers are demanding it, it'll happen. It's like free-range eggs. Woolies have said, we'll have free-range eggs. Everybody went, wah! Woolworths said, free-range eggs. Boom.
I agree totally. I think we're actually addressing the problem from the wrong questions or the incorrect questions, because I think we always have to go back to the needs of people and what do they need, what are the issues, what are the problems. have conversations are the first things about what is occurring, and just in the brief conversations already with the strawberry industry, talking about the fact that the strawberry industry has gone from 400 farms to 120 in Queensland over 10 years. The fact is that they've got bigger numbers. They're needing certain tools to do what they're doing. But again, like Lauren's saying, thinking outside the box and working with them on the needs and the issues and the problems. So I think we need to start there. Sometimes we think of the other side where certain widgets and tools have been created and have gone viral and are useful, but I think we get back to needs and create partnerships. So I agree totally with your points.
I think, it's a really good point, and it's good to probably be in a beef industry, because I can say that the industry has done a really good job over the last 20 years of thinking about ahead and knowing where they've got to be. We've got NLAS tags, we've got state-of-the-art electronics that can tell us the history of these animals' life, where they've been transported through right up until the abattoir. So MLA obviously has been doing a lot of scoping work overseas to assess, where that's needed in a high-end market and how you put that out on a product on the shelf to increase probably profitability. And that's probably the critical issue for industry, is if it's going to cost more, when it goes back to the producer, we can't just be taking more off the bottom dollar at the farm gate, because at the end of the day, it's not always sustainable to continue taking cuts and cuts and cuts. But in saying that, we're sort of sitting in an interesting position at the moment as an industry. We've just developed an industry-led best management practice for our beef industry in Queensland. It's developed in conjunction with FBA and DAFQ, and we've got it all rolling out on iPads in farms right across Queensland, so people can talk about fertiliser application, animal welfare. There's all these modules which gauge where industry is and benchmark where they are and what they need to do to get or retain industry best practice. But at this stage, we don't have a market driver for it. So that's sort of an interesting issue for us at the moment.
And I think, John, the other thing is most food companies now have their own websites, and there's a lot of information on the websites about the product, where it's from, the story behind the product. What we're not doing well enough is actually linking the consumer to that. And I think there are issues in Australia with the structure of our retail food industry. I think everyone in the room would accept that. So there's an issue in terms of how we're seeing some leadership from some of the smaller retailers and some of the other even the restaurant trade, to actually put QR codes on menus and that sort of thing, which will actually take you back to the website, and hopefully that'll drive some change right across the sector. Yeah.
I was just going to make the point that you're completely right. And technology push exists for many reasons, but one of them is companies are pushing into a vacuum. So we have to fill the vacuum. Again, I think the professional associations have a big role to play. But we need to bear in mind that for most of the people in the room here, Toowoomba is remote. Townsville is unthinkably remote. And the places where real farming happens is just not even on the planet. So anything that we can do to help meld the communities and get good conversations going, so that IT companies actually have a clearer idea of the target that they want to be aiming at, would be enormously helpful. And here I think the associations and the government can play a really important role. And so Paul's going to be circulating this stuff around steering committees and engagement. And so for us to take something away from here that's going to work really well, we really need a mixture of enthusiasts from all four sides really: agriculture, IT, the professional associations of both kinds, and government. If we can get that working, then I think we can get closer. Yes.
I think I should just note that there's a response from Townsville. I think it was in relation to the mention that Townsville was unthinkably remote. And they say, yeah, thanks, Simon.
Simon's our provocateur.
Sorry, I don't think it's a good thing that people think this. But the point is, we've got to find a way to communicate better.
There's also there's a question to the panel from Toowoomba, but they did make a statement saying that teleworking is about the outcomes. But the Toowoomba question to the panel is, how can we better connect solution providers with rural individuals, communities and organisations?
So how do we connect supply with demand, as opposed to demand with supply? So I prefer to go to either Brad or Lauren for their industry take on that question to begin with. Yep.
I guess we just need to keep the communication channels open. Like farmers and ICT people, we both work in highly specialised industries, and to each other it might seem quite daunting. I know with agriculture there's so many different associations and groups that to the outside world it might seem incredibly complex and difficult to engage with, but if we can get those communications channels open and happening, I think we can help meet that demand to supply. So, yeah.
I think sitting in AgForce, the best way for those sort of collaborations to occur is through probably the peak bodies and the CRCs. They're designed for that fact. They've got IP arrangements in place. They bring together both a combination of grower needs with industry people and ICT professionals. So that's where we get best bang for buck, because they also have quite good project delivery methodologies, which mean that all of those technologies prior to being rolled out will go through a very rigid testing phase, and that sort of addresses that issue that Ross touched on before. Every time that we have a new technology, we rave about it and take it out and it fails, it sets everyone back a few more years in terms of their uptake of the next thing they're going to have a look at. So,
word travels fast in the bush.
It does. I guess, if we look at who farmers take advice from, it's generally number one, other farmers or the neighbour before anyone else. So that's my advice in terms of getting it into their headspace.
There's a fantastic book written by a guy called John Seeley Brown, who founded Xerox PARC, where most of the UBU technology that we like to use today actually originated, called The Power of Pull. And he makes... The book is essentially an argument about how to build these kinds of communities successfully. And it turns out one of the key things is you've got to have lots of people who change from only being consumers to also being producers of information. So it starts becoming really important that, if we take farmers as an example, and I know I'm stretching here because I'm not a farmer, but rather than just watching other people's videos on strawberry production, you're actually putting your own videos on strawberry production, little video blogs and whatever out there, because it's that interaction that builds the community. And often people have a little insight that they don't think is very important, but everybody else, when they read it, go, wow, I never thought of that. And suddenly you've got a snowball happening. So again, this is education and outreach, and encouraging people not to be embarrassed. Everybody has a Facebook account, but I bet most of us don't do a lot of posting. I know I don't, because I'm embarrassed. I don't want people to read what I have to say. I don't think it's worth saying. So, we've got to overcome that and get more symmetrically engaged.
Yeah, John Bennett. I'm going to ask a bit of a question about research, and I'm a researcher myself, so I'm a bit remiss to bite the hand that feeds me, but surely we could be doing that more intelligently. I'd like to use an example where I won't supply any names to it, but where research was happening in one industry that had already occurred in another industry. So we're failing on a transparency, we're failing on information knowledge. You mentioned CRCs and RDCs, those types of things to sort of pick up on as a solution. But I would sort of argue that perhaps they're not communicating as well as they could, nor is the research community. So I'd be interested in the thoughts on how we start to use our agriculture and the digital future within that to make the research for agriculture more efficient.
One take on that, the type of research that I'm involved in, and I run a research and innovation institute, is design-based research, and that is done on purpose, because the first step in that is we look at big issues, big problems that we're trying to solve. That's the first stage of the research. We then try to come up with solutions. We then look at conducting research and evaluation on that intervention, and then develop principles out of that. Those principles are then disseminated through extension to different groups, but also fed back into the research cycle. So that's the sort of research I've been doing 20, 25 years, I suppose. They're always big issues, big problems. So I think that's one way to address it, that we have to get back to what are we doing with research and what is the benefit for the community and for society. I don't think there's any point in looking at small small issues or small problems that are not going to benefit a large number of people. So that would be my first take on the types of research. In terms of the transparency, I think that's where collaborations are important. A lot of the projects need to have lots of different universities involved, but collaborations with industry at the same time. And a number of the projects I'm working on, for instance, are with the RUN network, Regional Universities Network, 6 universities, CSIRO, and also 2 other groups to do with maths and science, for instance, in maths and science digital classrooms. So I think we have to fundamentally re-look at what we're trying to do with research, which is not just about producing outputs, but about the impact of the research. And that's where I think the regional universities do a pretty good job. They look at the impact on the communities.
If I could just make a comment, I think that technology, IT actually provides some of the answer here. So there are institutional arrangements that have been in place for a long period of time around the R&D in agriculture space, as we know. And they all operate slightly differently, but they operate, based on advice that comes from regional panels and a whole range of other things to set priorities and what have you. I'll give an example of one of those industry panels that I, about 10 years ago, spoke to about the problems with a particular product line that was oversupplied in the Australian market and the price was going down, and they were asking the government what they were going to do about this issue. And I asked the question about what they were doing with the R&D dollars, where their priorities went, and 90% of the money went into on-farm productivity. So what they were doing was actually creating the problem themselves by continuing to do that. They weren't actually thinking about, well, should we be doing more in export? Should we be doing more about supply chain? Should we be doing more about value add? Because that's not where the industry thinks. The industry thinks at the paddock scale through those advisory panels. If we can use technology to actually capture a broader, if you like, view of what the issues are, what the ideas are, what the opportunities are, then I think there's a way forward there. There may be an opening in that the Federal Minister has just announced a review of the MLA levy process. Whether that changes fundamentally the structure of how these priorities are set, I don't know. But there's an opportunity. There may be an opportunity. It's a Senate-based review for anyone in this room to have input into that process.
What I did about 20 years ago was put together an international conference and trade exhibition on clean food, the competitive edge, in which I put together the whole food chain from the research into production, and right through to marketing, packaging, transport, waste management, finance, and that. And there was quite a number of significant things within that. It was sometimes the first time that the researchers had met the people who are going to produce, who are going to consume what they do. So each part of the food chain, one is a buyer and one is a seller. So it connected them all in the one place. Now this may be something that could be done virtually. I had people, and I brought in buyers from Taiwan, sponsored by the horticultural sector, buyers from Europe, from the United States, manufacturers. Some things, like we do the research and the production very well, transport not so well, manufacturing we're short of money. I had a marketing omnibus study of 8 markets in the Southeast Asia, done by Frank Smalls in Singapore. So all that was brought together, as well as finance and public perceptions from University of California, Davis. So that's the kind of thing that I think if we're to embrace the Asian century, we need to pull together all those things to showcase what we do well, like in the production, and to try to draw on resources that we don't do so well, and also include the finance, investment and marketing, because I know from a long time of working with scientists, technology and engineers, that our failure is actually the failure of the marketing orientation of those people and their inverse snobbery in not respecting the value of people who are as smart as they are in other areas like finance and marketing.
Yep. Okay, as Tony Jones would say, I'll take that as a comment. But I really appreciate your participation, your active participation in today. This is a new activity for us, an extension of a very long-standing activity that we're trying to be innovative and be more engaging and connected between sectors. So it's been somewhat experimental, and we've had a very big program to get through, and a lot of content has come across. Now, I know my guys have been diligently collecting the information from the tables so that we can actually prepare a compilation report on the issues that have come out. We don't have time to make a summary of all those issues in a succinct way today, but what I would like you to do is, on the table there is a form, and if you are interested in contributing your intellectual wherewithal on this topic about ICT, digital agriculture, and what we could be doing better, and some ideas and initiatives, particularly as we go forward with our digital strategy finalisation project next year, and it transcends across sectors. Please express an interest on the form, or come up and give one of us your business card, because what we would like to do is, together with Malcolm at DAF and our two industry representatives, probably get our heads together based on the summation of this morning's event, and work out how we can actually work together on advancing some of the ideas through government strategies, industry strategies, whatever, in the year ahead. Is I would like to particularly acknowledge the cooperation that we've had from DAF in pulling this event together. It's been a challenging time to try and identify all the different facets of this, but I think we've tried to do the broad agenda justice this morning. But on top of that, also having AgForce and Queensland Farmers Federation and the AIIA here this morning, because there are a couple of other events on in town. I really appreciate your organisation's support for this. I particularly also would like to acknowledge Mike and his address. Covered a very big picture footprint as far as the digital future of Australia and Queensland in particular, and encourage you to go to his Dropbox site, and we'll also send out a link to the material that's come out today. So with that, would you please join with me in thanking our event partners?